Well, it's time to have another look at what's going on in LGBT Inclusive Education in Scotland. Now, you'll remember this policy was introduced by the SNP a number of years ago now. It was imposed by no parties in the Scottish Parliament. No MSP spoke out against it. So it's been rolled out into schools around the country. Now, I hear various stories coming from people who contact the family party telling me what's going on in their local schools, teachers, pupils, parents. So I've got a little clutch of such stories that I'd like to share with you today. And the first one is from Stornoway, from the Nicolson Institute. Now, just a reminder what happened in the Western Isles. The council rejected the Scottish Government's disgusting, corrupting rshp.scot sex education resources, which is fantastic. I mean, what a great breakthrough. The council is really representing the people there and protecting the children on the Western Isles from corruption. Fantastic. But what this shows is that even though the council did that, I mean, the battle is far from over. This comes from the top. This comes from the SNP government. So let's see what's happening in the Nicolson Institute, which is the high school in Stornoway in Lewis. So I was sent this picture of the notice board. Now you'll see this notice board is headed Health and Wellbeing. The other panel would have said Health and Wellbeing. And that's completely the opposite of the content. The content would be better titled Ill Health and Unhappiness. But let's see what they've got under the heading Health and Wellbeing. You can see the hand-drawn picture there with the pride flag. It says on, love is whatever you want it to be. I mean, if something's whatever you want it to be, surely it has no meaning. But anyway, but is that true? So sexual relationships can be whatever you want. Adultery, promiscuity, polyamory, relationships with more than two people, relationships with children. Is love really whatever you want it to be? Has anyone really thought about that? But that sort of mindless slogan emblazoned on the wall in the Nicolson Institute. Let's see what else is on this notice board. Sex and gender are two different things, even if people use them to refer to them as the same. Now, as I've said many times before, I won't try and explain what people mean by sex and gender because it doesn't make sense. It's a total confusion and muddle. So I won't try and clarify that, but let's carry on. Sex can be a combination of chromosomes in 5 different ways. XY for males, XX for women, XXY, XYY, XXXY, and X, all referring to people under the term intersex. Now that's quite interesting. So it's saying XXY makes someone intersex. Now XXY, if someone has those chromosomes, that's known as Klinfelter Syndrome. I'd just like to read you a little bit from the NHS website about that. Klinfelter Syndrome is where boys and men are born with an extra X chromosome. Okay, boys and men. Now, in my teaching career, I taught a couple of boys with Klinfelter Syndrome in a boys' school, and there's no question at all that they were boys, right? Klinfelter Syndrome is not intersex. It doesn't mean someone's neither a boy or a girl. There's sort of something in between. So what the Nicolson Institute has got on its wall there is wrong. So let's imagine you've got a boy with Klinfelter Syndrome. It affects about 1 in 660. I looked up this morning. So for example, in the Nicolson Institute, every now and again in that school, every few years, there'll probably be a boy who has this condition. He might walk up to that notice board and discover that he's actually not a boy, he's intersex. What sort of message is that to deliver? So that so-called information on the notice board is wrong, and it's potentially going to be extremely hurtful and confusing to a boy with Klinfelter Syndrome who is unfortunate enough to read the notice board in the Nicolson Institute. That's appalling. Right, when one is born, their sex assigned at birth is based on physiological characteristics, including their genitalia and chromosome composition. This assigned sex is called a person's natal sex. Again, promoting this sort of transgender ideology. Again, I won't begin to try and clarify because that's a total jumble and it doesn't make sense, but this is what's been presented as fact on the notice board. They maybe even call them information boards. That would be a bit of a misnomer. Right, what else do we find on this board in the school? Anatomy does not equal gender. Often people confuse sex and gender, thinking that what they were assigned at birth limits their gender identity. So that's encouraging transgenderism, basically. It's encouraging people to choose a gender other than their sex. In fact, gender is an entire spectrum in itself, which sometimes overlaps with sex. Right, do you agree with that? I just think that's wrong. That's a philosophy that's been dreamt up in some universities. I disagree with it completely, but it's on the wall as fact in the Nicolson Institute. Within the spectrum, there are multiple identities, these just being a few examples. Right, let's see what gender identities. I was educated reading this. I mean, grey gender, I'd never heard of it, but the pupils in the Nicolson Institute have been taught about it. Your grey gender, if you're ambivalent about your gender identity or expression, but identify at least partially with a gender identity, defined or not, outside of the binary. I mean, this is really wacky fringe stuff, and yet it's been taught to the pupils as though this is fact. You know, this is the truth that you need to know about for the sake of your health and well-being. I don't think so. I mean, androgyne, bigender, I mean, there are a few others. Now, I was quite intrigued that these gender identities that are pinned to this notice board, at the bottom there is the big word nurtured. So the school seems to think that teaching about these confused gender identities is a part of nurturing young people. I mean, what's nurture? Nurture is helping someone to develop their character, caring for them, offering them guidance, setting them in a positive direction. This is not nurture. This is anti-nurture. This is corruption and confusion. Now, the Nicolson Institute, I'm sure there'll be a lot of very good teachers. I'm sure there's lots of aspects of the school that are really great. But this is a pretty serious problem that we've got here in terms of pupil well-being and just the truth as well. So I think this will be affecting teachers. There'll be teachers at the Nicolson Institute who have to walk past this every day. They feel a bit alienated. They feel a bit uncomfortable. They don't think it's right. They're worried that if they say something, they might get into trouble. There'll be parents who are thinking, this is the last thing I want my children to learn at school. And there'll be pupils. There'll be pupils who will see this, who will be thinking, this is completely different from my personal values. I feel the school is going out of its way to communicate to me that they reject my values. They are hostile to my personal beliefs that might well be founded in, for example, Christian teaching. This sort of teaching will create tensions in families. How many pupils will go home and say, oh, we've been taught at school that you can be grey gender. I think maybe I'm grey gender. And the parents might say, well, you know, I'm not sure that's really a helpful way of looking at things. I'm not sure that's really a good way to identify yourself. But people's thinking, well, parents, what do they know? They're not the professionals. The school, they really know what's going on. They're up to date with the latest information on this area. Parents are just a bit old-fashioned and a bit thick. So it creates tensions in families. Whose fault is it? As I say, ultimately this comes from the top. This comes from the government and the lack of opposition to it as well within the Scottish Parliament. Right, so that's the Nicolson Institute. Let's go on a tour of Scotland. A lot of these stories are, I'm not going to reveal the information about who, what, where and when. Often I do know it, but they don't want it to be shared. Another story, parents very concerned that a class, junior class, a high school, had a classroom helper arrive who announced that they used to be a boy, but they're now a girl. So pupils coming home saying, what? This is a bit confusing. What's going on here? Again, that shouldn't be happening. How about this for a story? A teacher chatting to a group of pupils, and they were talking about Doctor Who. And the teacher said, I don't really like it anymore now that it's a woman. I mean, Doctor Who's a man. I don't like the fact they made it into a woman. Okay, just casual chat. Pupils report the teacher to the school authorities. Teacher hauled in to meeting with senior staff, reprimanded and advised to undertake further equality and diversity training. It's true. This is education in Scotland. Right, the General Teaching Council for Scotland, my old friends, their magazine came out a couple of months ago, and they put an image on the front of it. Now, I'd sometimes thought I could do a cartoon trying to illustrate the things that are wrong with Scottish education, some of their obsessions that are such with politically correct, progressive political campaigning rather than actual education. So I was thinking about doing a little cartoon, but then the General Teaching Council for Scotland saved me the job because they produced it for me. This image is from the front cover of their magazine, Teaching Scotland, and this is the classroom of the future. So what do we see there? Well, obviously this is a huge rainbow pride flag at the front of the classroom. On the board there's 4 faces. I think they're supposed to be pupils, so the pupils are just listening to other pupils. There's a recycling box. There's a United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child poster. There's only one child sitting there at a desk doing any work, but they're not actually doing work. On the computer screen is a gender equality symbol. So the General Teaching Council of Scotland put out this image as a vision for the future of Scottish education. Now, the rest of the magazine is full of all the usual things. It's all about racism, sexism, LGBT, mental health, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, anything about how to teach people maths better, English, improving language skills, anything about that. No, not interested. It's just progressive political campaigning is at the heart of Scottish education as far as they're concerned, and the government's concerned, and almost all councils are concerned as well. And it seems the vast majority of head teachers as well just go with the flow. I was talking to another teacher a couple of weeks ago who'd had a case launched against them by the General Teaching Council of Scotland. In the end, it didn't go anywhere. It didn't go to a hearing or anything because of a technicality. And the case was based on the fact that the teacher had made comments about human sexuality, I would say, from a sort of mainstream Christian perspective. But say the case was opened against them. I was talking to another teacher, talking about the Scottish Government's transgender guidance. And I said, have you come across any cases where a pupil changes name and gender in school and it's kept secret from the parents? And they said, oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's several in the school where I work at the moment. This is a rural school as well. Don't feel that you're safe from this because you're out of the big cities or whatever. This is everywhere. I heard from another school where a group had been in giving LGBT training. And at the end of the training, for the teachers, at the end of the training, the teachers were told, the way we're finishing off this session, the way you can register that you've done the course is you can sign the LGBT pride flag. And the teacher I was talking to was saying, no way, I'm not going to sign that. And a lot of other teachers as well were saying, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. But they feel under such pressure. If you were to say publicly, say to the group, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not in alignment with my values. Then people are thinking, that's the end of your career. You're in big trouble if you said that. I think a helpful way to think about it is that the pride flag effectively means, you can think pride flag equals, I disagree with the teachings of the mainstream Christian churches and great religions of the world and many other socially conservative people. Because the pride flag is at odds with those teachings. So in displaying the pride flag, it is expressing disagreement and rejection of the teachings of Christianity, basically, and other religions as well. Okay, what else we've got? Edinburgh City Council is still funding Mamoru Iriguchi. I made a video about his sex education show a while ago. But just to say, he is still on the radar here. It seems to be funded by Edinburgh City Council, and the show that is made is now being sort of assessed, and he's trying to get it into schools. His previous show was performed in schools in Edinburgh, and he's trying to get this one in. So be aware, if you're in Edinburgh, this might be coming to a school near you any day soon. Here are a few snippets.
And then that's when I thought, okay, there might be something that I could say from a kind of more zoological, biological viewpoint. I made some props that sort of to explain how the sexual activities happen among the human beings.
This is my vagina fascinator, and it's got a bit of fluid in it, and that's what's coming down here.
This is our 3rd show today.
So I think after this run, we're quite keen to be able to take it into schools, have a workshop as well, perhaps.
I shared the development process with one of the schools in Edinburgh.
My truth is an ongoing search for my gender identity and sexuality. I came out as non-binary about 2 years ago, and I started taking testosterone about 10 weeks ago. Thank you.
Yes, that's a little snapshot of a few bits of LGBT inclusive education in action around Scotland. This obviously is the tip of the iceberg, to say the least. I mean, this is virtually universal throughout schools. Why do we care? We care because it's damaging young people, it's encouraging them to make bad choices, it's providing them with bad advice, and it's causing tension, extreme tension in many families. Now, if you're thinking, oh, I'm going to write to my MSP about it or whatever, I would say basically the die is cast. The die was cast on the 6th of May when we had the Scottish elections, and the electorate has voted into the Scottish Parliament a set of parties who are going to just allow this to continue. The way we've got to challenge it is changing that so that there's politicians in the Parliament representing people who think this is the wrong direction for education, and that's what the Scottish Family Party is all about. So do support us. There's a link below via which you can join us. Okay, thanks for watching.